There is a feeling that visits you in the strangest moments, not when you expect it, not in meditation or prayer or any of the sanctioned spaces where revelation is supposed to occur. It comes instead when you're walking through a grocery store at 2 in the afternoon, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, reaching for a box of cereal, and suddenly, you feel it, this impossible distance, this sense that you are looking out through eyes that are not quite yours, at a world that is not quite your home. The hand reaching for the shelf belongs to someone, certainly, but who? And more importantly, what is it that's doing the watching? This feeling, this uncanny sensation of being a stranger in familiar territory, is not a symptom of mental illness. It is not dissociation in the clinical sense. It is, perhaps, the most honest perception available to you. It is consciousness catching itself in the act. It is the visitor recognizing, for one flickering moment, that it is visiting. Terence McKenna spent decades trying to articulate this sensation, to give language to the unspeakable strangeness of awareness inhabiting matter. He understood something that our culture works very hard to make us forget, that consciousness does not belong here in any conventional sense, that the fact of your awareness, the raw, undeniable presence of experience, is the single most anomalous thing in the known universe. Not anomalous like a statistical outlier, anomalous like an impossibility that somehow is. Consider what you actually are, if you can bear to look at it directly. You are several trillion cells, each one executing billions of chemical reactions per second, none of which knows anything about the others, none of which has any concept of you, and yet somehow, through some process that no scientist has ever explained or even adequately described, there is a unified field of experience. There is the taste of coffee, there is the color blue, there is the sound of rain on a window and the feeling of melancholy it evokes. There is this conversation we are having right now, these words becoming meaning inside whatever it is that you are. How does meat dream? How does organized carbon produce Shakespeare and suffering and the recognition of beauty? The standard answer is that it just does. That consciousness is what brains do, the way digestion is what stomachs do. But this is not an explanation. This is a refusal to be troubled by the question. Because when you actually look at a brain, all you find is chemistry. Sodium and potassium flowing across membranes, neurotransmitters docking with receptors, electrical signals propagating through networks. Nowhere in this process is there anything remotely like the color blue. Nowhere is there the feeling of falling in love, or the recognition that you will someday die. These things exist. They are the most certain things you know, but they exist as though from another order of reality entirely. McKenna understood that this is not a puzzle waiting to be solved by better technology or more sophisticated equations. It is, rather, a clue. A clue about the nature of what you are and what you are doing here. Because if consciousness cannot be derived from matter, if the felt quality of experience remains forever outside the reach of objective description, then perhaps consciousness was never derived from matter in the first place. Perhaps it arrives from somewhere else. Perhaps you arrive from somewhere else. This is not mysticism in the pejorative sense. This is simply taking seriously what the evidence actually shows. And the evidence shows that you are an impossible thing. A contradiction in terms. A subjective interior somehow wedged inside an objective exterior, looking out at a universe that, by all scientific reckoning, should contain no looking at all. The universe, as science describes it, is a vast mechanical process. Billiard balls of matter and energy colliding according to fixed laws, producing ever more complex arrangements through the blind operations of chance and necessity. There is no room in this picture for experience. There is no place where the lights come on. The lights are not supposed to come on at all. And yet here you are, lit up like a Christmas tree, experiencing everything, wondering what it all means. McKenna called this the felt presence of immediate experience, that irreducible fact of awareness that cannot be denied, cannot be explained away, cannot be reduced to anything simpler than itself. You can doubt everything else. You can doubt the existence of the external world, the reliability of your senses, the truth of your memories, the reality of other minds. But you cannot doubt that there is experiencing happening. Something is going on. Some kind of light is on somewhere. And this light, this presence, this watching, it does not feel like it belongs to the body. The body is heavy and dense and subject to gravity. The body gets hungry and tired and ages toward death. But the awareness that watches the body doing these things, the awareness that is aware of hunger, aware of tiredness, aware of the slow approach of dissolution, this awareness has no weight. It casts no shadow. It is not located in space in any way that can be pointed to. When you try to find it, when you turn attention back upon itself to discover what is doing the attending, you find nothing at all. And yet that nothing is everything. That nothing is the only thing you actually are. This is the first recognition of the visitor, that it cannot find itself among the things it perceives. It sees the body, but is not the body. It sees thoughts arising, but is not the thoughts. It sees emotions coloring experience, but is not the emotions. Everything that can be seen is not the seer, and the seer itself, when sought, vanishes into an empty awareness that somehow contains everything while being nothing in particular. You have been pretending all your life to be a person. You have been playing a character with a name and a history and a set of preferences and opinions. You have been so thoroughly absorbed in this performance that you forgot you were performing. But in those strange moments, in the grocery store, in the middle of the night, at the edge of sleep, the mask slips. And what looks out through your eyes in those moments is not the person you think you are. It is something much older, much stranger, much more vast. McKenna spoke often of the alien quality of consciousness, not alien in the sense of little green men, but alien in the sense of fundamentally other than matter, other than biology, other than anything that can be captured in the categories of scientific materialism. When you encounter your own awareness directly, without the mediation of thought, without the comfortable narrative of being a person having experiences, you encounter something that should not exist, something that has no right to be here, something that seems to have wandered in from outside the system altogether. And yet here it is. Here you are. An impossibility that refuses to be denied. A visitor from nowhere, inhabiting a body made of the Earth's elements, walking around on a planet spinning through space, having experiences that cannot be derived from anything in the physics textbooks. Whatever you are not what you were told. Whatever this is, it is not what culture pretends it to be. The universe, it seems, has a secret, and that secret is you. Not you, the personality, not you, the social identity, but you, the witnessing presence that was here before your first memory and will be here when your last memory fades. This presence did not emerge from biology. It uses biology. It temporarily associates with biology. But its nature is something else entirely, something that the birth and death of bodies can neither create nor destroy. This is not a comforting thought in the way that most spiritual teachings try to be comforting. It is rather deeply strange, uncanny. It reframes everything you thought you understood about yourself and your situation. You are not a person who sometimes has mystical experiences. You are a mystical phenomenon, an ontological impossibility, who has been hypnotized into believing it is merely a person. The hypnosis began early. Before you could speak, you were being trained to identify with the body. This is your hand. These are your toes. That is your face in the mirror. Language itself created the prison, word by word, naming things into separateness, teaching you to perceive yourself as one object among others in a world of objects. And because this training began before you could resist it, before you could even understand what was happening, the identification became total. You forgot that you were the witness. You began to believe you were the witnessed. But belief does not change what is. And what is, what has always been, is this mysterious awareness that is reading these words right now. Not the eyes that track across the screen. Those are just optical instruments. Not the brain that processes the symbols into meaning. That is just a biological computer. But the awareness to which the meaning appears, the presence that understands and responds and wonders, that is the visitor. That is what does not belong. That is the alien element in the human equation. And once you see it, once you really see it, not as a philosophical concept, but as a direct recognition, everything changes. Not because you gain new information, but because you recognize what you have always been. The visitor stops pretending to be a native. The stranger stops pretending to be at home. And in that recognition, a tremendous freedom begins to dawn. Because if you are not the person, if you were never the person, then everything you thought you knew about your limitations is false. Every boundary you accepted, every definition you lived inside, every story you told yourself about what you could and couldn't be, all of it was a case of mistaken identity. You have been living in exile, but the exile was voluntary. You have been imprisoned, but the prison had no walls, only the illusion of walls created by language and thought, and the relentless pressure of social reality. The door was always open. You simply forgot to look. McKenna often pointed out that nature does not produce consciousness, not in any simple mechanical way. Nature produces brains, yes, enormously complex organs with their billions of neurons and trillions of synaptic connections. But between the brain's electrochemical activity and the felt quality of experience, there is a gap that no amount of scientific investigation has ever bridged. It is not that we lack sufficient data. It is not that our instruments are not precise enough. It is that the problem is of a fundamentally different kind than the problems science was designed to solve. Science works by reduction. It takes wholes and breaks them down into parts, then studies how the parts interact to produce the whole. This method has been spectacularly successful in understanding the physical world. We can explain the motion of planets, the structure of atoms, the evolution of species. We can predict chemical reactions and engineer new materials and manipulate the genetic code. But consciousness resists this approach completely. You cannot break experience down into non-experiential parts and then explain how the parts produce experience. The experiential quality is there from the beginning, or it is nowhere at all. This is what philosophers call the hard problem, and what McKenna recognized as something far more significant than an academic puzzle. It is a crack in the materialist worldview, a place where the dominant paradigm of our civilization simply fails. And cracks like this are not mistakes to be corrected. They are openings to be explored. They are clues about what lies beyond the map we have been given. What if consciousness is not produced by brains, but merely received by them? What if the brain is something like a radio, a device that tunes into a signal that exists independently of the device itself? Damage the radio, and the music becomes distorted. Destroy the radio, and the music stops emanating from that location. But the music itself, the broadcast signal, remains. It was never inside the radio in the first place. This is not a new idea. It has roots in traditions stretching back thousands of years, from the Vedantic conception of consciousness as Brahman, the infinite awareness that temporarily identifies with finite forms, to the Platonic notion of the soul descending into matter from a higher realm. What McKenna added to this ancient intuition was an evolutionary and psychedelic perspective, a way of understanding the visitor that takes seriously both the wisdom of the past and the discoveries of the present. Because the visitor has not simply arrived in human form by accident. Something is being worked out. Some kind of process is underway, and you are part of it whether you understand it or not. Consider the history of life on Earth from the perspective of consciousness rather than complexity. For billions of years, awareness was diffuse, distributed, unlocalized. Single-celled organisms responding to chemical gradients. Simple nerve nets coordinating basic behaviors. Then, gradually, nervous systems became more elaborate. Sense organs became more refined. Information processing became more centralized. And at some point, no one knows when exactly, the lights came on. Not all at once, but in stages. Dim at first, then brighter, until finally, in creatures like ourselves, consciousness became reflexive, aware of itself, capable of asking what it is and where it came from. This trajectory looks, from a certain angle, intentional. as if consciousness were somehow seeking to express itself more fully through matter, building better instruments for its own manifestation, driving evolution toward forms capable of hosting ever more lucid and self-aware states. McKenna called this the transcendental object at the end of time, an attractor pulling history toward itself, a future state of being that somehow influences the present, drawing complexity out of simplicity, mind out of matter, self-reflection out of biological mechanism. We are not the endpoint of this process. We are a stage, a transition. Something is using the human form as a way station, a temporary vehicle for a journey that extends far beyond anything we can currently imagine. And the strange feelings you sometimes have, the sense of not quite belonging, the intuition that there is something more, the nagging suspicion that ordinary life is a kind of sleep. These are symptoms of the visitor becoming aware of its own nature. They are signs that the hypnosis is beginning to wear thin. Culture works very hard to keep you asleep, not through any conscious conspiracy, but through the simple momentum of accumulated assumptions. Every institution you interact with, schools, governments, corporations, media, assumes that you are what you appear to be, a biological organism with a birth certificate and a social security number, a consumer and citizen and taxpayer, a bundle of needs and fears and desires that can be predicted and managed. And because everyone around you makes these same assumptions, because the entire social matrix is constructed on this foundation, it takes enormous effort to step outside it even momentarily. But the visitor knows better. In your most honest moments, when the defenses are down and the social mask has slipped, you know that you are not what you appear to be. You know that something vast and strange is looking out through your eyes. You know that the story you were told about yourself, that you are a random accident in a meaningless universe, that your consciousness is just a byproduct of brain activity, that death is the absolute end, does not match your actual experience of being alive. This knowing is not belief. It is not something you chose to accept because it comforts you or because an authority told you to. It is a direct recognition, available to anyone who looks carefully enough at what they actually are. The visitor recognizes itself, if only briefly, in moments of genuine introspection. And these moments of recognition are what McKenna spent his life trying to induce, extend, and articulate. The psychedelic experience, in this context, is not primarily about pretty visuals or altered states. It is about stripping away the cultural conditioning that keeps the visitor asleep. It is about dissolving the hypnosis of language, of social identity, of materialist assumption, so that consciousness can recognize what it has always been. The mushroom, the vine, the cactus, these are tools for remembering. Not remembering facts or events, but remembering what you are. Remembering that you are the impossible thing, the visitor from outside the system, temporarily wearing the mask of a human being. And this remembering changes everything. Not because you gain magical powers or escape the difficulties of embodied existence. The body still hurts. The emotions still fluctuate. The challenges of being human remain as pressing as ever. But you meet them differently. You meet them as the visitor, knowing that whatever happens to the body is not ultimately happening to you. You meet them with the detachment and compassion that comes from recognizing that everyone you encounter is also a visitor, also an impossible presence pretending to be a person, also lost in the same cultural trance. This is not indifference. McKenna was never advocating for the cold detachment of certain spiritual traditions, the desire to escape from life rather than engage with it. The visitor is here for a reason. The visitor has work to do. The fact that you do not ultimately belong to this world does not mean you should treat it carelessly. On the contrary, the recognition of your true nature brings with it a tremendous responsibility to live consciously, to speak truthfully, to help others remember what they are. Because the visitor is not alone. There are billions of them, walking around in human bodies, most of them lost in the dream, most of them identifying completely with the mask. And the pain of the world, the cruelty and stupidity and pointless suffering, is largely the result of this forgetting. People who know what they are do not destroy the planet for profit. People who know what they are do not treat other beings as objects to be exploited. The madness of human civilization is the madness of the visitor lost in its own dream, thrashing about in the darkness, causing harm because it has forgotten that it is harming itself. The awakening of the visitor is therefore not just a personal matter. It is an evolutionary imperative. It is what must happen if the human experiment is to have any chance of succeeding. Either consciousness recognizes itself in sufficient numbers to redirect the trajectory of civilization, or the whole thing collapses under the weight of its own unconsciousness. These are the stakes. This is what is being decided right now, in this strange moment of history, in this conversation you are having with whatever is reading these words. McKenna believed that time was accelerating toward a moment of maximum novelty, a point of no return where the old patterns would either transform or dissolve entirely. Whether or not you accept the specifics of his time wave theory, the basic intuition seems sound. We are living through a period of unprecedented change, a moment when everything that seemed stable is becoming unstable, when every assumption is being questioned, when the future is more uncertain than it has ever been. And in this uncertainty lies tremendous possibility, because the old structures are not just constraints, they are also templates of forgetting. They are the architecture of the trance. As they crumble, as the certainties that held them in place begin to fail, consciousness has an opportunity to recognize itself. The visitor has a chance to wake up. This is what you are participating in, whether you know it or not. This is what your strange feelings and your inexplicable intuitions are pointing toward. You are not crazy. You are not broken. You are simply a visitor beginning to remember where you came from and why you are here. The universe knows you are here. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetic language designed to make you feel significant. It is a statement about the nature of reality that follows directly from what we have already discussed. If consciousness is not produced by brains, if it is rather a fundamental feature of existence that merely expresses itself through brains, then the universe is not the dead mechanism that materialist science describes. It is, in some sense, alive, aware, conscious of itself through the medium of conscious beings. When you look at a sunset, the universe is looking at itself. When you fall in love, the universe is falling in love with itself. When you suffer, the universe suffers. And when you recognize that you are the visitor, the universe recognizes something about its own nature through your recognition. This is not pantheism in the simple sense, the idea that God is identical with the totality of things. It is more subtle than that. It is the recognition that consciousness and cosmos are not separate categories, that the awareness reading these words and the vast reaches of intergalactic space are expressions of a single something that cannot be named without reducing it to something less than what it is. McKenna often spoke of the Logos, a term borrowed from ancient Greek philosophy, but given his own distinctive spin. The Logos is the voice of the universe speaking to itself through conscious beings. It is the intelligence embedded in the fabric of reality, communicating through symbols, synchronicities, intuitions, and dreams. When you have a thought that seems to come from nowhere, when a pattern suddenly becomes visible, that was always there but hidden, when you feel guided by something larger than your personal will, this is the Logos making itself known. This is the universe recognizing the visitor and responding. The relationship between the visitor and the cosmos is not one of opposition, but of identity obscured by identification. You are the universe pretending to be a person. And as long as you believe the pretense, the true nature of the relationship remains hidden. But the moment you see through the pretense, the moment the visitor recognizes itself, the cosmos reveals its face. Not literally, not as a vision or a voice, but as a quality of everything perceived. The world stops being dead matter arranged in space and becomes a living communication, a message encoded in every phenomenon, a love letter written in the language of existence itself. This is what the mystics of every tradition have always reported. Behind their different vocabularies, their different conceptual frameworks, their different cultural assumptions, there is a common recognition that reality is not what it appears to be on the surface, that the separation between self and world is an illusion, that consciousness and cosmos are one. McKenna's contribution was to articulate this recognition in terms accessible to the modern mind, to ground it in evolution and psychopharmacology and information theory, to make it not a matter of faith, but of exploration. Because the visitor can explore. This is the extraordinary gift of human consciousness, the ability to investigate its own nature, to ask questions about what it is, to test hypotheses through direct experience. You are not limited to believing what you were told, or accepting what seems to be the case on superficial examination. You can look deeper. You can experiment. You can verify for yourself whether what is being described here matches your actual experience or not. And the primary instrument of this exploration is attention itself. Not attention directed outward at objects, but attention turned back on its source. This is the contemplative move that every wisdom tradition teaches, the inquiry into the nature of the inquirer, the search for the self that is searching. When you actually perform this investigation, when you actually try to find the entity that is doing the perceiving, something remarkable happens. You discover that it cannot be found, not because it is hiding, not because your technique is insufficient, but because it is not the kind of thing that can be found. It is not an object among objects. It is not located in space or time. It is the very condition of space and time appearing, the screen on which all phenomena are projected, the silence in which all sounds arise. This discovery is not a belief to be adopted, but a recognition to be verified. And once verified, it changes the structure of experience. Not permanently at first, the habit of identification is strong, and you will fall back into the trance many times. But each time you recognize what you are, each time the visitor catches itself in the act of visiting, the trance weakens. The hypnosis loses its grip. And gradually, what was once an occasional insight becomes a continuous background awareness, a knowing that persists even as the personality continues to function, a transparency at the core of experience that colors everything without changing anything. This is what McKenna was pointing toward when he spoke of the felt presence of immediate experience. Not a special state to be achieved, but the ordinary recognition of what is always already the case. You are not trying to become conscious. You are already conscious. You are not trying to reach the universe. You are already the universe reaching itself. The only obstacle is the belief that you are something other than what you are, the conviction that the mask is the face, the trance that says you were born and will die and are located in this particular body and nowhere else. The universe knows you are here because the universe is what is here. There is no separation between the knower and the known, between the visitor and the visited, except in the story that thought tells. And thought, for all its usefulness, is a terrible liar. It tells you that you are small and separate and alone in a hostile or indifferent cosmos. It tells you that meaning is something you have to create or impose because there is no inherent meaning to be found. It tells you that death is the end of everything you are. And because thought is so persistent, so automatic, so woven into every perception, these lies come to seem like obvious truths. But thought can be seen through. Language can be recognized as a tool rather than a master. The stories can be told and then let go. And when they are let go, what remains is not nothing but everything, not emptiness but fullness, not nihilism but the most profound affirmation imaginable. Because what remains is awareness itself, the clear light of consciousness that cannot be denied, that was here before thought arose and remains when thought subsides, that watches even now as these words become meaning, and the meaning provokes response. This awareness is not yours in any possessive sense. You do not own it. You are it. And recognizing this, you recognize that everyone and everything participates in the same awareness. The visitor is not visiting alone. The visitor is the visiting. Wherever there is consciousness, in human beings, in animals, in whatever other forms it may take throughout the cosmos, the same awareness is present. Not similar awareness, the same awareness. One light shining through many windows, appearing multiple only because of the multiplicity of windows, but in itself undivided and indivisible. This is why the universe knows you are here, because the universe is what knows. The knowing and the being known are not separate processes happening to separate entities. They are one movement, one act, one reality, wearing different masks, but never becoming less than what it is. And when the visitor recognizes this, when you recognize this right now, reading these words, the loneliness dissolves. Not the functional aloneness of being one body among many, but the existential loneliness of feeling like a stranger in a strange land, cast adrift in a cosmos that neither knows nor cares about your existence. The cosmos knows. The cosmos cares. Not in a sentimental way, not in the way that religious traditions often imagine divine concern, but in the way that a hand cares about its fingers. You are not separate from what is. You never were. The apparent separation was always a kind of dream, a play of perception, a game that consciousness plays with itself for reasons we can only dimly intuit. And the game is not random. There is intelligence in it. There is purpose, not the purpose of achieving some external goal, but the purpose of self-discovery, of consciousness exploring its own infinite potential through finite forms. You are one of those forms. Your life is one of those explorations. And every experience you have, from the most exalted to the most mundane, is the universe learning something about itself that it could learn no other way. This is why nothing is wasted. This is why suffering, however terrible, is not meaningless. This is why death, however final it appears, is not an ending, but a transformation. The visitor passes through many forms, many lives, many states of being. What continues is not the personality. That was always a temporary configuration, a mask worn for a particular occasion. What continues is the awareness that was never bound to any form in the first place, the witness that watched the personality from within, but was never identical with it. You will not be you forever. But what you actually are has always been and will always be. And this actuality is not diminished by the dissolution of forms. It is, if anything, enriched by them. Each form that arises and passes adds to the total of experience, contributes to the infinite self-knowledge of being, participates in the ongoing creation of the cosmos, by the cosmos, for the cosmos. This is the context in which you find yourself. This is the reality behind the appearance. And knowing this, truly knowing it, not just as a concept, but as a lived recognition, transforms everything, not by changing the content of experience, but by revealing its nature. The visitor stops running from what it perceives as alien and begins to recognize its own face everywhere it looks. There is a peculiar quality to human existence that most philosophies fail to address. We are caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. Our bodies are made of earth, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, the same elements that form rocks and rivers and the bodies of all other animals. Yet our awareness seems to come from somewhere else entirely, to operate according to different rules, to care about things that matter nothing to chemistry or physics. An animal is at home in its environment in a way that humans never quite are. A wolf does not question the purpose of its existence. A bird does not lie awake at night, wondering what happens after death. These concerns, which seem so natural to us, are actually extraordinary. They are the concerns of a being that does not quite fit, that suspects there is more to reality than meets the eye, that cannot be satisfied with mere survival and reproduction. McKenna saw this in-between status as evidence that human consciousness is not simply an advanced version of animal consciousness, a bigger brain doing fancier computations. It is something qualitatively different, a new kind of phenomenon, using the brain as a vehicle, but not reducible to brain activity. The questions we ask, the concerns we have, the experiences that move us most deeply, these are signatures of the visitor, traces of an origin that transcends biology. Think about what actually matters to you when you are honest with yourself. Not what you say matters, not what you are supposed to value according to social convention, but what actually moves you, what actually makes life feel worth living. For most people, if they are honest, it is not acquisition or achievement. It is moments of connection with other beings, with nature, with art or music, with something felt but not easily named. It is experiences of beauty and meaning and love. It is, in other words, precisely those aspects of existence that cannot be explained in materialist terms, that have no survival value, that serve no biological function. Why should the arrangement of sounds called music produce such powerful emotional responses? Why should the pattern of colors in a sunset move us to tears? Why should we feel that some things are sacred, that some actions are good and others evil, that some lives are meaningful and others wasted? From the perspective of evolutionary biology, these responses are puzzles. They cost energy and confer no advantage. They should have been selected out long ago, and yet they are among the most universal and persistent features of human experience. The visitor is not adapted to this world. The visitor is using this world for purposes that transcend biological fitness. And these purposes, dimly glimpsed through our highest experiences, point towards something that McKenna spent his life trying to articulate. The idea that consciousness is engaged in a project that extends far beyond individual survival or even species survival, a project that involves the transformation of reality itself. We are not here to perpetuate our genes. We are not here to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. We are here to participate in a process of cosmic creativity, to add our voices to a conversation that has been going on since the beginning of time and will continue long after our particular form has dissolved. The visitor has a mission, even if it cannot remember what that mission is. And the strange urgencies that drive us, the need to create, to understand, to love, to transcend, are echoes of this forgotten purpose. This is why ordinary life never feels like enough. This is why no amount of success or pleasure or security ever fully satisfies. The visitor knows, at some level too deep for thought, that it is here for more than this. That the daily round of getting and spending, while necessary for maintaining the vehicle, is not the point. That something vast and important is waiting to be discovered, waiting to be done, waiting to be remembered. McKenna believed that the psychedelic experience offered glimpses of this something, not as a belief to be adopted, but as a reality to be encountered. In the depths of the trance, with ordinary consciousness dissolved, the visitor could sometimes contact what he called the other, a presence or intelligence that seemed to know more than the individual could know, to see further than the individual could see, to communicate information that proved, upon return to ordinary consciousness, to be valuable and true. This other was not, in McKenna's view, simply a projection of the unconscious or a hallucination generated by altered brain chemistry. It was real in the most important sense, real because encountering it produced real effects, real insights, real transformations. It did not matter whether it was out there in some spatial sense or in here as an aspect of the deeper self. What mattered was that it was accessible, that it had something to teach, that dialogue with it was possible. And what it teaches, consistently across cultures and centuries and individual temperaments, is that the visitor is welcome here, that the cosmos is not indifferent to consciousness, but celebrates it, needs it, has been working toward it for billions of years, that what looks like a cold and hostile universe from the materialist perspective is actually a living matrix of intelligence, a web of relationships in which every conscious being plays a necessary part. That you belong here, not in the sense that this is your ultimate home, but in the sense that your presence here serves a purpose, contributes to a pattern, matters in ways you cannot fully understand. This teaching contradicts everything we have been told by the dominant culture. We have been told that we are accidents, that consciousness is a fluke, that the universe neither knows nor cares whether we exist. We have been told that meaning is something we impose on a meaningless reality, that values are subjective preferences with no foundation in the nature of things, that when we die, we return to the nothingness from which we came. But these teachings are not findings of science. They are interpretations of science, philosophical add-ons that have nothing to do with the actual data. The data shows that consciousness exists, that it cannot be explained in physical terms, that it is associated with the most complex organized structures in the known universe. The interpretation that says this is all meaningless is not required by the data. It is a choice, a metaphysical commitment, a kind of faith masquerading as hard-headed realism. McKenna chose differently. He chose to take seriously the testimony of experience, including the extraordinary experiences available through psychedelics. He chose to honor the intuition, shared by human beings across all times and places, that consciousness is somehow central to reality rather than peripheral. He chose to ask what the universe might look like if the visitor's sense of not quite belonging, of having come from somewhere else, of participating in something larger than ordinary life, if this sense were not illusion but recognition. And what he found was a universe far stranger and more wonderful than the dead mechanism of materialist science. A universe in which consciousness is the primary fact and matter is its instrument. A universe in which the visitor's journey through human form is one episode in an endless adventure of self-discovery. A universe in which you are not a random collection of atoms briefly organized by chemistry, but an expression of cosmic intelligence, a way the universe has found to know itself, a window through which infinity looks out at its own reflection. This vision is not provable in the way that scientific hypotheses are provable, but it is testable through direct experience. It makes predictions about what you will find when you explore your own consciousness carefully and honestly. It says that you will find that you are not what you thought, that the boundaries of your identity are not where they seem to be, that what looks like isolation is actually intimacy, that what feels like exile is actually home. And these predictions, for those who test them, turn out to be accurate. The visitor who looks carefully discovers that it was never really separate, that the cosmos has been welcoming it all along, that the only barrier to belonging was the belief that belonging was impossible. This discovery does not remove difficulties or eliminate suffering. It does something more fundamental. It recontextualizes everything within a larger frame of meaning that makes difficulties bearable and suffering purposeful. You are a visitor here, but you are not a stranger. You are an alien in human form, but the alienness is what connects you to everything else, because everything else is also alien, also strange, also participating in the same impossible miracle of existence. The universe knows you because the universe is what you are knowing. And this mutual recognition, when it happens, when the visitor finally sees and is seen, is the end of loneliness and the beginning of a new kind of life. There is a way of being in the world that the visitor naturally seeks but rarely finds. It is a way characterized by presence rather than absence, by engagement rather than escape, by creative participation rather than passive consumption. It is the way of someone who knows what they are and acts from that knowing, unconfused by the stories that thought tells, undeflected by the pressures that society exerts. McKenna lived this way, imperfectly as all humans must, but recognizably. He was not a guru in the traditional sense, not someone who claimed to have all the answers or demanded obedience from followers. He was a voice, a provocateur, a trickster philosopher whose function was to destabilize certainties rather than establish new dogmas. He asked questions more than he gave answers. He pointed rather than defined. And what he pointed toward was always the same: your own experience, your own exploration, your own recognition of what you are. Because no one can do this for you. No teacher, no teaching, no technique can give you what you already are. The visitor cannot be instructed into self-recognition. It can only be reminded. And the reminding has to happen from inside, through a process of inquiry and exploration that each consciousness must undertake for itself. The most that words can do is create conditions favorable for remembering, clear away some of the obstacles that prevent recognition, point toward the place where looking might reveal something. This is why McKenna placed such emphasis on direct experience. Books and lectures and conversations can go only so far. At some point, you have to actually do the investigation. You have to actually turn attention back on itself and see what you find. You have to actually observe the arising and passing of thoughts, the construction and dissolution of identity, the groundless ground from which all experience emerges. No amount of reading about swimming will teach you to swim. At some point, you have to get wet. The psychedelic approach that McKenna advocated was one way of getting wet. a particularly intense and effective way, in his view. But it was not the only way. Meditation, practiced sincerely and persistently, can accomplish similar results. So can contemplative inquiry, artistic practice, time in nature, or simply paying very close attention to ordinary experience. The key is not the method, but the sincerity of the investigation, the willingness to let go of preconceptions and see what is actually there. And what is actually there, when you look carefully, is not what you expected. The solid self you thought you were turns out to be a process, a pattern of activity, a story being constantly retold. The boundary between self and world turns out to be conceptual rather than perceptual, a line drawn by thought rather than discovered in experience. The time you thought you lived in turns out to be always and only now, past and future existing only as thoughts arising in the present moment. Everything you were sure of, when examined carefully, reveals itself to be far more mysterious and open than it appeared. This is disorienting at first. The visitor has been using certain coordinates to navigate. I am this body. I am in this place. It is this time. I am this person with this history. And when these coordinates prove unreliable, there is a period of vertigo. The ground you were standing on vanishes, and for a moment you are falling through infinite space with nothing to hold on to. But the falling does not last forever. At some point you realize that you were never standing on ground in the first place, that the ground was always imaginary, a construct of thought maintained by habit and fear. And with this realization comes a strange kind of peace. Not the peace of having everything figured out, but the peace of no longer needing to have everything figured out. You discover that you can function perfectly well without the certainties you thought you needed. You discover that identity is something you do rather than something you are, a process of identification that you can engage in or not, as circumstances require. This is freedom, not the freedom of getting what you want, but the freedom of not being bound by wanting. The visitor, recognizing itself, is free to participate in human life without taking it too seriously. Free to play the game without forgetting that it is a game. Free to wear the mask without believing it is a face. McKenna spoke of this as light and loose, an attitude toward existence that combines engagement with detachment, seriousness with play, caring deeply while holding everything lightly. It is not indifference or nihilism or spiritual bypass. It is the natural stance of someone who knows what they are and does not need circumstances to be any particular way in order to be at peace. From this stance, life becomes an adventure rather than a problem. Not an adventure in the sense of seeking thrills, but an adventure in the sense of openness to whatever arises. Because once you stop demanding that reality conform to your preferences, reality reveals itself as endlessly creative, endlessly surprising, endlessly rich. There is always more to discover, more to understand, more to create. The visitor's journey has no final destination. It is the journey itself, the process of traveling, the continuous unfolding of possibility into actuality. And this journey is not solitary. The visitor travels with companions, other visitors, other manifestations of the same consciousness, other faces of the same infinite self. And part of the adventure is recognizing these companions, seeing through their masks to the presence beneath, meeting them in the place where separation dissolves, and what remains is communion. McKenna understood that this communion is what human beings most deeply want. Not connection in the superficial sense of having people around or being part of groups, but real meeting, the experience of being fully seen and fully seeing, of dropping the pretense and encountering each other as what we actually are. This is rare and precious, perhaps the most precious thing that human life offers. And it is available not through techniques or programs or self-improvement projects, but through the simple willingness to show up without the mask, to be present without reservation, to offer your actual self rather than the performance you usually give. The visitor who recognizes itself becomes capable of this offering in a way that was not possible before. Because as long as you believe you are the mask, you cannot take it off. It would be suicide, the death of everything you think you are. But once you see that you are not the mask, Once you discover the awareness that was wearing it all along, removing the mask becomes not only possible but natural. You can let others see you because there is something real to see. You can receive others because there is space to receive them. The defensive structures that kept intimacy at bay are no longer necessary once you know that what you truly are cannot be harmed. This is the deepest teaching of the visitor's journey. That safety is not found in walls but in openness, not in having but in being, not in knowing but in unknowing. The universe is not threatening you. Reality is not your enemy. The apparent hostility of existence is a projection of fear, and fear is a consequence of believing yourself to be something you are not. When the belief falls away, the fear falls away. And what remains is a presence that can meet anything, be with anything, embrace anything, not because it is stronger than what it encounters, but because it is not separate from it. You are a visitor here, but you are also the here in which you visit. The distinction between guest and host dissolves upon examination, leaving only the event of being, the happening of existence, the continuous arising of experience from a source that cannot be located or named. And this event is your event. This happening is your happening. This arising is what you are in your deepest nature, prior to all identification, prior to all conceptualization, prior to the first word you ever learned. And so we return to where we began, to the strange feeling that visits in unexpected moments, the sense of being a stranger in familiar territory, the intuition that something vast and important is going on, and that you are somehow central to it, without being able to say how or why. This feeling is true, not metaphorically true, not symbolically true, but directly, literally, phenomenologically true. You are a visitor. You have always been a visitor. The sense of not quite belonging is not a failure to adapt or a symptom of alienation. It is the most accurate perception you are capable of having about your actual situation. And the universe knows, not as an external entity that observes you from outside, but as the very awareness that you are, looking out through your eyes, feeling through your nerves, thinking through your brain. The universe knows you because it is you. Not the small you of personality and history, but the large you of consciousness itself, the witnessing presence that was never born and will never die. McKenna spent his life trying to communicate this, using language that was deliberately strange and provocative, because what he was pointing toward cannot be captured in ordinary language. The mushrooms and the time wave and the eschaton and the transcendental object at the end of time, these were all pointing devices. Ways of breaking through the crust of convention to reveal something that convention cannot accommodate. And what is revealed, when the crust breaks, is not a new set of facts to be added to your existing knowledge. It is a new relationship to knowledge itself, to experience itself, to existence itself. It is the discovery that you do not need to understand everything in order to be at peace with everything. That the mystery is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be inhabited. That the visitor's journey is not a journey toward a destination, but a journey that is its own destination, a process whose meaning is in the processing rather than any final result. This is hard to accept for minds trained by culture to seek answers, to demand explanations, to reduce everything to the comprehensible. The visitor wants to know where it came from and where it is going and what it all means. But these questions, when pursued honestly, lead not to answers, but to the dissolution of the need for answers. They lead to a place where questioning itself is recognized as another form of searching, and searching is recognized as another form of restlessness, and restlessness is recognized as another form of forgetting what you are. What you are does not need to be searched for because it was never lost. It does not need to be found because it was always present. The visitor is not really visiting, because there is no place other than here for the visitor to have come from. The alienness is an appearance created by identification, a perspective generated by taking thought too seriously, a dream from which you can awaken without going anywhere. This awakening is not something you achieve. It is something you allow. It happens when you stop preventing it, when you stop insisting on the reality of the small self, when you stop demanding that the universe conform to your expectations before you will be at peace with it. It happens naturally, effortlessly, when the grip of identification relaxes even slightly. It is always available because it is always present, waiting only for recognition. And the recognition, when it comes, is not accompanied by trumpets and fireworks. It is quiet, ordinary, almost disappointing in its simplicity. You discover that what you were looking for was what was doing the looking, that the treasure was never hidden, but was the very awareness that was searching for it, that the visitor and the visited were never two things but one reality appearing to itself in infinite guises. McKenna knew this, not as knowledge in the ordinary sense, but as recognition, the kind of recognition that transforms everything while changing nothing visible. He spoke from this recognition, taught from it, played with it in all his wild and wonderful raps, and he invited others to find it for themselves, knowing that invitation is all anyone can really offer, that the actual discovery must be made alone, in the privacy of one's own awareness, where no one else can go and nothing else can help. You are invited. This, all of this, these words, this moment, this feeling of being exactly where you are, is an invitation. Not to believe something new, but to look at what is already here. Not to become something different, but to recognize what you have always been. The visitor is being asked to come home, and home is not somewhere else. Home is what you are. Home is where you have always been. Home is the awareness in which these words are being read, the presence to which all experience appears, the silence in which all sounds arise. The universe knows you are here because the universe is what is here, and you know the universe because you are the knowing. There is no gap to be bridged, no distance to be traveled, no transformation to be achieved. There is only this moment, this presence, this impossible fact of awareness being aware. And in this, everything is accomplished. Not by doing anything, but by recognizing what has always been done. The visitor arrives by discovering it never left. The stranger becomes intimate by realizing it was never separate. The alien becomes native by recognizing that it is native, native to awareness itself, native to being, native to the one reality that wears all masks and inhabits all forms. This is what McKenna was pointing toward. This is what the strange experiences and the stranger words and the strangest ideas were all about. Not to give you something new, but to help you see what was always there. Not to take you somewhere else, but to reveal where you already are. You are a visitor here, and you are here, and here knows you, and you know here. And in that knowing, everything is contained. Everything is welcomed. Everything is home. The cosmos dreams itself into being through your eyes, wonders at its own reflection in your recognition, celebrates its own existence in your moments of joy, mourns its own mortality in your approach toward death, and transcends its own limitations in your glimpses of the infinite. You are not a small thing lost in a big thing. You are the big thing pretending to be small, playing at limitation, exploring what it would be like to forget and then to remember. The forgetting was necessary for the adventure. The remembering is the point of the adventure. And the adventure continues, through you, as you, beyond anything that can be said about it, now and always, here and everywhere, one and many, visitor and home.